Let's welcome the founder and CEO of AlphaGeo and author of the book Move, How Mass Migration Will Reshape the World, Parag Khanna, in conversation with Skift founder and CEO Rafat Ali.
All right, hey folks, how are you? So I know it's me and Parag standing in between you and lunch. Parag, we're standing in between lunch for folks. But well, thank you for virtually doing this. I know you were going to be in Delhi, but things changed and unfortunately you couldn't make it. Remind me, are you a Delhi boy?
Kanpur, actually. But a lot of my family is in Delhi today. Lovely to see you, by the way. Namaste, everyone. And just remember, I know that lunch is coming around, but if Prime Minister Modi can fast for a week, you can hold out another 20 minutes.
And about 1.5 billion Muslims in the world are fasting right now, so we should be
Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you. So Parag and I have known each other for a long time. We go back to New York, and then he's now based in Singapore, is running this company called AlphaGeo, which is actually tell yourself, Parag, what the company is so people know.
Sure. We are a data science, a geospatial data science company. We're mapping out the entire planet in terms of its resilience to climate shocks and actually predicting migrations, investment flows, infrastructure investments, and so forth to figure out what the best places are to invest in the future for companies to locate assets, even for people to move.
And so Parag is also quite famous in the geopolitical world as a futurist, I guess, maybe, as an analyst, as a thinker around how different parts of the world are connected. And yes, and Parag, I'm going to ask you if your views have changed. Yes, there's this wave of nationalism and sort of retreat from globalization, but Parag is on record saying these are momentary blips and we're moving in the right direction. Just don't focus on the headlines, look at the larger trend lines that are happening in the world. So actually, let me ask you this. You've written 12 books at this point, or 13?
Oh my goodness, I'm not that old yet, Rafa. Only 7.
Seven, okay. You'll get there soon.
Feel free to propagate a greater mythology about me.
So in your book, I guess, Connectography, where you talked about the different connections in the world, you're probably one of the most well-known books is The Future is Asian, right? Is that the book? This current moment doesn't seem like the most conducive moment for globalization today. What's your sense? You and I talked 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so has your view changed?
My views have not changed. It's really a question of the time horizon you're looking at. Every couple of years brings a new wave of people proclaiming the end of globalization. We're both old enough, but still young enough to remember the 9/11 terrorist attacks 24 years ago, the global financial crisis of 2008, the first Trump election and Brexit in 2016, COVID in 2020, and now the trade wars. And Rafat, you can remember that the Financial Times, the Economist, the Wall Street Journal, everyone in the Western Anglo-American press has had a headline after every one of those episodes going back 25 years. This is the end of globalization. This is the retreat of globalization. This is the death of globalization. Have they ever been right? Not even close. So we really need to let the facts dictate here. Globalization is alive and well. Globalization is the single most resilient phenomenon on the planet, right? It is literally what connects all of us, and it continues to unfold very rapidly to this day. You don't measure globalization only by the number of ships that are traversing the Suez Canal. You measure it by the number of internet cables being laid down across the ocean floor, the petabytes of data crossing them, the value of the services economy relative to the goods economy, which is catching up and soon to exceed it. And of course, for the purposes of our conversation today, by the number of people crossing borders, which when you and I last spoke, when it was late COVID, there were fears, there were concerns that really this represents a paradigm shift in mobility. And yet there we were. The human propensity to move, to relocate, to travel was back with a vengeance after COVID. And every year, as you know better than anyone in the world, we continue to set new records in the number of people who cross the border every single year. And what could be more important when we measure globalization than simply the movement of people And that alone makes a convincing case.
So give us a sense of your timeline. You said you look at timelines, but what is your timeline on sort of the pushback against this economic nationalism that's going on right now? Or is there, it's hard to predict the timeline itself. This, like, you know, the Trump era will be over in 3.5 years at this point, or a little over 2.5 years?
There are always pendulum swings, whether it's in the mood, whether it's in policy. And of course, right now represents, at least in the United States, an extreme pendulum swing. But you can't look at one region, one country as synonymous with the world. In fact, one of the notable moments from just a couple of weeks ago at the renowned Munich Security Conference, where J.D. Vance gave his famous speech castigating Europe on European soil, was that all the Europeans then immediately went to the Chinese foreign minister and said, time for us to deepen our trade with each other. And of course, Europeans are looking to India. So treat the world as a collection of regions and powers and map out all of their networks to each other before you pass a judgment on the whole. And on the whole, what you're seeing is that whether it's Latin America, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Europe, whether it's Asia, everyone is saying not, uh-oh, now it's time to retreat. They're saying, how do we build new connections around the US if the US is going to become an obstacle? No one is saying we don't want to be connected. You will never hear people say that. You will hear people say, and this is true in the US and it's true in other places, there needs to be a healthier equilibrium. We need to produce more of what we buy. And that is perfectly healthy. Not only is it healthy, it might even be more sustainable. Do we need to have so much fuel traveling on tankers all over the world if we can use solar power and nuclear power? No, we don't. There are many ways in which correcting globalization would be better for the planet and for civilization. So I'm not a maximalist about globalization for the sake of it. I'm for a healthy new equilibrium. And that equilibrium, by the way, again, most of all, involves human beings crossing borders, circulating in each other's economies and societies to add value. Because we've never, ever lived at a time of more acute shortages of labor, demographically, where economies depend ever more on services, which is, of course, human beings participating in the economy with each other. COVID taught everyone this, right? And everyone in the room in the tourism industry knows it very well. You would much rather have that marginal person in your country, traveling in your country, spending in your country, than not having that person.
True. Speaking of India, the neutrality of India, you and I messaged back and forth around this, on world affairs. India has been doing this for decades. The non-aligned movement, India was one of the founders of it. Nehru, going back all the way to, I think Nehru, if I'm not mistaken. Currently, in some of the geopolitical conflicts, India is still non-aligned, if you will, ish. And so, is that? Do you think if a downturn comes or economic nationalism increases momentarily, does that benefit India? Does that harm India? How do you see India's integration into the global economy at this stage?
Well, India's share of total global trade is relatively low. And India actually has substantial vulnerabilities as an importer of commodities and raw materials. That has a very negative impact on India's current account deficit and leads to trade-offs and subsidies policies. This fact alone actually helps to explain India's policy towards Russia, even if you strip away the historical amity between the two countries. Simply put, when a country imports a lot of commodities, it wants stability out there to keep those prices of oil and gas down. It's just basic arithmetic. So one can very easily rationalize Indian foreign policy. More than 20 years ago, Raja Mohan, the distinguished Indian strategic analyst, and I, a very, very dear friend and mentor, we wrote a paper together in which we coined the term multi-alignment. Multi-alignment is now the term that you hear Foreign Minister Jay Shankar and others use very, very regularly. And I would say that India today is a very positive archetype of this multi-alignment behavior, not the non-alignment of the past. And that's a clear evolution, even a distinction or a break. Multi-alignment is the smarter strategy for the world of today. Not to say we are aloof, we will stand aside. Rather, we are going to engage with all sides in all directions, no matter what anyone thinks of us, in our own interest. We're going to get the best deal we can in our relations with America, with Europe, with Russia, with China, with Gulf countries, because that is in India's best interest, to multi-align in all directions. And the smartest countries today, diplomatically, whether it is the United Arab Emirates, whether it is India, whether it is Kazakhstan, whether it is Brazil, what they all have in common is that they are actively practicing, not passively, actively pursuing these multi-alignment strategies. India is doing just that, and it should forever continue to do just that.
Does the multi-alignment overlap with where Indians are moving to?
That is a brilliant question, and sometimes migration is a lagging indicator of geopolitical relationships. Sometimes it's a forward indicator as well. In the case of the United States, of course, it was a forward indicator. You've had Indian migrants in waves, in larger and larger waves, of course, through especially the late 20th century, when I myself, migrated to America. And of course, now that you have a rock solid population of a total of more than 20 plus million Asian Americans, at least to 5 million or so Indian Americans, the South Asian diaspora being so large, you now have an irrevocable reality where the perspective of Indian Americans has to be factored in. You have Tulsi Gabbard, of course, right now in New Delhi with you, probably just a few kilometers away. So I think that is very important. Now look at Europe, by the way, which really never gets talked about. But as you know, I wrote a lot about this in my Asia book. I grew up as an Indian American. What I did actually in the Move book was to say there are now Asian Europeans. This is not a hyphenation that even exists. I invented it because now what you see is ever more Asians, which again is shorthand for Indians, who constitute such a large portion of that, all across Asia. Exactly where you're sitting right now, Rafat. 3 months ago, the former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz came on a state visit to Delhi, and he signed a bilateral agreement that 90,000 Indian software engineers would be welcome to Germany every single year in order to buttress their innovation economy, their software industry, and so on. I've been watching that number grow actually over the last 30 years, since I was in high school in Germany at that time, to the present. And so, again, a lead indicator. We don't even, yeah.
You speak very fluent German too, by the way.
If you'd like, I can do a party trick.
Continue in English. Yes, please.
But so you're starting to see, and the geopolitics of the estrangement, of the demographic and cultural estrangement that some Asian minorities, Indians too, are feeling, whether it is in the US, in Canada, is actually going to be to Europe's benefit. You're already seeing the headlines every day. Right now, the Financial Times today said European universities are poaching American scientific talent given the Trump administration's war on academia. Well, who are those scientists? Surprise, surprise. Of course, many of them are Asians. The Chinese are going back to China. The Indians may come back to India. But the Indians, of course, are also welcome all over the world. So, Stanford and Caltech and Harvard's loss is going to be LSE and Oxford and ETH's gain. And you'll see even more Indian American talent migrate to Europe.
Switching gears a tiny bit on your day job, which is climate change and where people move. What happens with India if you and I are going to sit here and talk in 10 years, hopefully in person? Where will Indians be moving to, or within India? I don't know if you have that granular level. And sort of what should we think about the future of India as a geography from a climate change point of view? Bangladesh is very vulnerable. I think all of us know that part. But what about India itself? It's getting hotter every year.
Yeah, there is no sugarcoating this, Rafat. It should be something that tragically motivates all of us. South Asia is the single most populous region of the entire world. We all know that. It is truly by far the most climate stressed region as well. It's the heat waves, the droughts, the floods, the typhoons, you name it. Every possible physical climate risk is acute for the South Asian population, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the rest. And India is really under investing in climate adaptation. Two quick answers to your question. A couple of years ago for National Geographic, I did a long analysis of exactly this question. Where will Indians go, both within India and outside of India? The outside of India part, is obviously clear in terms of outward Indian migration. And of course, as you know, Indians represent the largest number of expatriates from any country in the world any given year. In India, it's not a simple matter of saying either south to north or east to west, west to east, and so forth. It really is about the proximity to certain resources, right? Arable land, fresh water from rivers, and so forth. So, in general, the human tendency is to go from coastal to inland, from lower elevation to higher elevation, from hotter to cooler. But with a population of 1.4 billion people, we also have to not think about this as just some naturally unfolding phenomenon. We have to actively intervene to make the right quality of infrastructure investments. Now, nothing motivates more than numbers and the bottom line. So just last month or a month or two ago in the Financial Times, I did a recalculation of India's GDP. I said that by the year 2030, India's GDP will be about 600 to 700 billion dollars less than what the Indian Ministry of Finance is projecting. They're projecting about $8.3 trillion. I think we calculated something more like $7.7 trillion. And that is a very precise, if you will, or based on a precise methodology in which you discount the GDP of every single state in India based upon its economic composition. How will agriculture, how will industry, how will services be affected by floods, by typhoons, by power outages, by the stress on labor productivity because of heat and so forth? And when you, from the bottom up, recalculate India's GDP in light of this acute physical climate risk, that is a substantial correction to GDP. It's not something that India cannot afford, but is it something that India should allow itself to succumb to? No. So for the purposes not only of, for the humane reason of doing what is right for all of Indians, then also for the economy and to ensure that India is attractive for all the travelers, tourists, the business travel, and so forth, these interventions, these investments in climate adaptation need to be made aggressively, and they needed to start yesterday.
And can India play the card that the West has to pay for it?
Well, unfortunately, that's just not going to work in the diplomatic theater. And diplomacy today has been reduced to theater. At least multilateral climate diplomacy has. I've been watching this for way too long, and these ideas of a loss and damage fund and adaptation funds, they say all the right things, but there's almost no money on the table. And when that money does get put on the table, it's going to go to smaller, poorer, weaker countries. And again, we should not be playing with our own lives, right? India has to take the lead in helping India adapt, first and foremost. Others will come in to co-invest if they see India taking its own problems seriously. And that is the way in which others will help to support, quote unquote, paying for it.
Will climate tech solve Delhi's pollution problem?
I mean, as you know, things like seasonal brush fires resulting from agriculture industry, the obviously atmospheric conditions of winter and so forth, these things happen. I mean, they can be reduced substantially through just economic planning and through certain behavioral changes and regulations in the private sector and down to the local level with villages and farming and so forth. So it can be fixed. We've seen China fix it, of course. And by the way, for those who don't remember, one of the reasons China cleaned up its coastal pollution is because the World Bank presented a study to the Chinese government about more than 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, that said, here is the exact amount of GDP that you are losing every year as a result of people not being able to breathe the air and go to work in the factories or even go out and go shopping and consume because the air is unbreathable. You can't see the sky. And that was actually one of the things that motivated China to aggressively clean up its skies. the same effect should happen in India. We do not have the luxury of saying, well, it took China 35 years to do this, therefore it will happen in 35 years by some natural course of events. There is no natural course of events. There is aggressive policy intervention and learning. And the circumstances in India in terms of the climate are far worse than China. There are many reasons not to compare India to China. Political regime is one reason, and the climate reality, the stress that India faces, is just different from what China faces, and it's quite simply a lot worse. So let's not pretend that it's just simply naturally going to improve. It's not. We have to actively tackle it.
Brian, just add 3 more minutes and then we're done. 3 more minutes, please. The app already says its lunch is served. It is served, but just give us 3 minutes. Last question, we want to change a little bit of topic. So this very interesting phenomenon is happening in the US. The Indians are now at the top level running big companies. We all know their names. They're icons, not just in India, but icons around the world. People that are running largest companies, not just tech companies, but largest companies in the world. Indians have risen on global Hollywood stage. Indians have risen on the political stage, the biggest of stages in the world. UK is now owned by Indians at this point, which is sort of irony, as you know. US, Indian, half Indian American almost became the president. Number 2's wife is Indian. All the stuff you know, I'm not giving any new information. Yet, the backlash against Indians that happened particularly on Twitter, but I'm sure on other platforms, I'm not on other platforms, LinkedIn, it doesn't happen, it happens less. Particularly fueled by Elon Musk, caught a lot of us by surprise. The virility, is that the word? The virulence by which the backlash happened against Indians. Is it a delayed reaction to the outsourcing thing that happened 20, 25, 30 years ago? Or is there something else behind it?
Well, the most important thing to say in response to this is that Twitter is not reality, right? It is just like any other social media filter bubble, generally a platform that represents a narrow set of voices and gravitates towards extremes. You and I both know that the surest way to genuinely grasp and encounter reality is in person with your own 2 feet, your own eyes and ears. And as always, that will give you a very different impression than social media alone. And this, fortunately, is one of those cases. You know very well, as a resident of New York, and we know from traveling all across America, that the day-to-day reality of immigrant life remains one of inclusion, right? Of multiculturalism, of integration, and so forth. So much so that it is second nature for most migrants most of the time, most certainly for Indians, as it has been for generations. So yes, there are extremes, and yes, it's worrisome, and yes, it's unfortunate that that happens, in particular on social media. But we just have to remember that the surest way to overcome that phenomenon is, of course, through travel. So, travel greater than Twitter is always my intellectual, guidance in situations like this. And I do think, to reinforce this optimistic note, I do think that even though that is just an episode, it will, like others, it will pass. That said, from an economic standpoint, and I think Indian policymakers, business leaders, and others in the room can appreciate that if you are an American policymaker, you are looking at a technical issue, which is what are the wages being paid to immigrants, irrespective of their skills relative to locals, under the H-1B visa scheme. To reform that at a technical level is the level, therefore, at which we should engage in the conversation and say, yes, there is scope for compromise here. Let us self-correct here. It may lead to simply more Indian investment in the United States, which may simply help to enable more Indians to travel to the country. And I do think there's a diplomatic win-win way to work this out. But let's attack it at the again, technical, functional level that it should be, and never let Twitter hijack our conversations.
Well, speaking of not letting Twitter hijack conversations, let's have lunch. Okay. All right. Thank you, Parag. Great to see you.
So good to see you all.
All right.
Thank you.
See you soon.